You should see my screen now, right?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Small group, so we have a lot of time to discuss, which I really like. What is the idea today? What do I want to present to you? Multi-team systems. And as Bernd already said, I came across this topic about 12 years ago when I was working at the University of Munich. And before, I never thought about it. And since then, I see multi-team systems everywhere. It's so interesting when you start to think of a concept, you suddenly see it. What is the idea? What do I want to present to you today? The idea is if you have more than one team, then especially the interteam processes and leadership get more important. And what I want to present to you today is on the one hand, theory and research about interteam and team processes, but also about leadership in multi-team systems from a rather functional perspective. So I don't want to go into details regarding different leadership theories, but more have a look on a practical perspective. What do leaders have to do? And to mention it already up front, leaders does not mean you have to be a person that is a leader. You can also have shared leadership in teams and multi-team systems, depending on how you structure your multi-team system. But starting with the basics, a slide I usually use when I present things to my students is looking at development in organizations at different levels. What every one of you knows, you have personal development, which focuses on individual learning and competencies and getting individuals more competent, more confident on what they are doing. You also have team development, which focuses on team learning in work, project, or management teams. And then you suddenly make a huge jump to organizational development, which is about organizational learning and culture change. And as I already said, there seems to be some kind of remarkable gap, especially when you are in large organizations. The jump from the team level to the organizational level is huge. And the idea is, how can you bridge this gap or how can you close it by focusing on multi-team systems? So first of all, some definitional work to do. What is a multi-team system? Basically, simply said, it's a network of teams. Two or more teams that can be within one organization or also across organizations with that interface directly and interdependently, always responding to environment contingencies and towards the accomplishment of a collective goal. So what is the idea? You have an overarching goal that has to be done by the multi-team system. The task is, on the other hand, so complex that it can't be reached by a single team. That's why you need different competencies, different things that are done by the individual so-called component teams, and they are placed in a so-called goal hierarchy. Then this goal hierarchy also defines the limitations and boundaries of a multi-team system, meaning you have teams that have their proximal individual goals. A classical example is when there is an accident. You have the police people who have to take care about that nobody approaches the scene. Then you have, for example, firefighters. Then you have an emergency response team. Then you have a surgical team at the hospital. Their overarching goal is to save the life of the people that were in this accident, for example. But all the different teams have different responsibilities regarding this overarching goal. And what is the really interesting thing is that they have interdependencies. That means all the component teams exhibit input, process, or outcome interdependence with at least one other team in the system. Input dependencies means regarding resources, regarding information they have. Process interdependencies means that you have to, for example, approach the same stakeholders, or you need to align very well while you are doing the task because you have informational dependencies while you do your work. And outcome dependencies means that you have goals that have to be finished or tasks that have to be finished by one team before the other team can start. So without having people bringing the one from the accident to the hospital hospital teams cannot start, which is quite obvious. But if you transfer this to more complex situations and organizations, you are often depending on other teams. Quite modern is the thinking in end-to-end processes, where I go through processes and think about, okay, who starts the process, who's coming next, who is end responsible for delivering the product then again back to the customer. And if you think of these systems, you have, I think, many areas where multi-team systems are important in organizations. A lot of research originally came from the military sector, which is quite obvious because you have coordinating functions, you have troops that are on the ground, you have troops that are in the air, and they all have to align with each other in order to succeed in their mission. If you look at more modern forms of cooperation organizations, when you think of scaled agile frameworks, for example, in SAFE, you have the agile release train. Yeah, what is the idea? You have several sub-teams that are responsible for different parts of the software, for example, or of the products, which all have to combine in order to succeed finally in the product development. Or what else? Yeah, coming from the change area, if you have larger change programs with different change projects in them, there's most times an overarching goal of the change process, but different teams are responsible for different parts of the change process. So they all have to align to cooperate in order to fulfill the overarching goal of the multi-team system. So I hope when you now start to think in multi-team systems, and you think about your own organization, there might already arise some ideas where these multi-team systems sit in your organization. Especially, as I said already, product development or end-to-end process are interesting areas where to look for them. And usually it's rather complex to interact with them because they are getting bigger and bigger. It's not only one team with one leader and quite homogeneous culture, especially when you span several organizations that have to collaborate, for example, in product development, then you learn, oh, it's also about cultural differences between the teams that have to be somehow managed. What is now crucial for the effectiveness of multi-team systems? You see here the idea that you have several teams that, from a theoretical perspective, alternate between transition and action phases. What is a transition phase? When you do mission analysis, when you think about what are the goals, when you do planning, when you do resource allocation. So you prepare for an action phase where you, at the end of the day, do the work that you have planned in the transition phase. And then you get back to some kind of transition phase where you reflect, did we reach our goal? Where did we not yet reach our goal? Where do we have to make changes? Has the context somehow changed in order to step into the next performance cycle, again, consisting of a transition and action phase? And what is now rather interesting, between several teams, unfortunately, sometimes the transition and action phases are not well aligned. So some teams start at some point with their planning, others start only later, leading to some kind of chaos because you don't know where and when the different teams are at the moment. And in the consequence, you are not able to align well with each other to reach your goal. So what is important? Two main things in order to reach multi-team system effectiveness. On the one hand, alignment of goals. Which is the level of adjustment, interconnectedness, and synchronization of goals. There are two levels of alignment. On the one hand, vertical, regarding or related to the overarching multi-team system goals. So you as a team have to think about how do I, with my goals and products that I produce, contribute to the overarching goal. And on the other hand, there's horizontal alignment related to goals of other teams in the multi-team system. So you not only have to look up to the overarching goals, but also think about how are we interconnected with other teams in order to fulfill our mission. And the second concept I would like to introduce to you is the entrainment of performance cycle. As I already said, what is it about? The adjustment of the pace or the cycle of activities in each team to match or synchronize the pace or the cycle of other teams. When you think of Scrum, of OKRs, we have these quarterly cycles, monthly cycles, weekly cycles. I think since I'm in the agile context, I realize this might be the theoretical foundation and entrainment of why you have all these very strict cycles that are there. introducing sprint planning, doing the work in sprint meetings, and then afterwards having a retrospective. This gives some kind of drumbeat that is really important in order to help the teams to align on a regular basis on their goals, on their task fulfillments, and to understand where also the other teams are. Hey, Kristen. So looking at the theory now, what is important and which processes are essential in multi-team systems. And I follow here really great work from Marx and colleagues who developed a taxonomy of teamwork processes that also can be easily applied to multi-team systems. What do we have? On the one hand, we need processes that are delivered and carried out during the transition phase. We have processes that are relevant for the action phase. And spanning both phases, we also need interpersonal processes. I will go into more details in a minute, that relate to all the things that people do with each other, how they feel, how they manage conflict, how they manage cohesion, identification, how they foster motivation also, which is spanning those both phases, transition processes and action processes. Which processes do you have? On the one hand, you have mission analysis. What is this all about? You have to interpret and evaluate what is the mission of our team, or in an overarching sense for the multi-team system, what is the mission of our multi-team system? Why are we there? What do we have to face as challenges? What are our constraints? What are our contingencies? Which resources do we have? What is our background? Then you have to do goal specification. That is, you have to identify and prioritize also your goals and sub-goals that are needed to accomplish your mission. And you have to formulate a strategy and plan it. So not only ideally one strategy, but also alternative courses. For example, if-then plans. If you already can plan, oh, maybe there's a scenario when we can't fulfill our mission and goal in one way, you already can plan in the transition phase what you could do. Unfortunately, this is rarely done. Most times you only invent one specific way how you could approach something, and then you're really puzzled, when there are things happening that you didn't expect. In an ideal world, you would do this in advance already. What processes are relevant during the action phases? On the one hand, you have to monitor your progress towards the goals. That means you have to track how far you are already in your mission. You have to look at sub-goals, the sequence of sub-goals. But on the other hand, you also should do resource and systems monitoring. While you do your task, look on the one hand, do we have enough resources? Do we spend the resources in a way that we planned it? Has something changed in the overarching system, in our environment, so that we have to adapt? For example, one of our backup plans, do we have to replan because we learned that there are some constraints where we can't proceed in the way we initially thought that might be helpful for achieving our goals? In addition to that, you should do mutual monitoring and backup behavior. So not only from a top-down perspective, looking at is everyone doing his or her task, but also within teams, but also between the teams, looking at do the people deliver on a timely manner in the quality that it was discussed before. And you always know that sometimes things happen that you didn't expect. Some people might get sick. Some people might have problems in fulfilling their tasks. That's why you should always have also a look at, can we have people who back up others in their tasks, in the things they have to accomplish. And last but not least, communication and coordination. You have to communicate. You have to inform each other where we are, what we have already approached and achieved, and you have to coordinate the efforts that are done in the different teams, but also across teams. 3 interpersonal processes are relevant during task accomplishment and also during planning. On the one hand, not only during transition phases, when you discuss what mission do we have, what goals do we want to achieve, and what strategy do we have, there might arise conflicts. There might be different opinions and perspectives on how to approach a task. That's why it's needed that you always look at your level of conflict. Is it still a good conflict, or is it something that stops us from reaching our goals? During task fulfillment, but also during the transition phases, you have to look at motivating and confidence building. What does this mean? You should generate and preserve a sense of collective confidence. You should look at task-based cohesion and should foster identification, not only of the individual team members with their team, but also of the different teams with the overarching multi-team system. And last but not least, affect management, where you have to regulate members' emotions during the mission, including but not limited to social cohesion, frustration, excitement. So deliberately looking at what people feel, because feelings are the basis often for positive, but also for detrimental behaviors. So these are, in a nutshell, the most important processes you should look at, not only from a team perspective, but also from a multi-team system perspective. I will go more into details because, as I often say, and I cite Kurt Lewin in the sense, there's nothing more practical than a good theory, because as you can imagine, coming from a survey background, there are questionnaires that you can apply to a system in order to measure how much these processes are carried out in systems. And this is for me always the starting point for optimizing things, having something at hand where you can give feedback, first of all, collect opinions, then give feedback and work on specific ideas how to improve your processes during task accomplishment. Having another perspective, because I said not only processes are important, but also leadership is an essential and crucial factor for the success and the effectiveness of multi-team systems. And I will stick to my theoretical perspective, differentiating between the transition phase and the action phase. Second, on the one hand, and on the other hand, you have to separate between within team leadership behaviors, between team leadership behaviors, and external, meaning managing your stakeholders during the accomplishment of the tasks of your multi-team system. I here built on a book that I also have in my recommended readings. I will show it to you immediately, and it's also in the slides that I think Bernd, you will send them around later. It's a really nice book from Sakharov and colleagues, where they define and also summarize the relevant literature and theory and also empirical studies that have been conducted on multi-team systems. And they also suggest a model regarding what leadership behaviors are essential during or for multi-team systems. Starting with the external and leadership behaviors that are important in the transition phase, when you plan what you have to do, when you specify your mission, and when you develop your strategy. First of all, environmental scanning and the analysis of constraints is important. So I always start with the outside. Some people start with the inside, thinking from the team level. Coming from a very customer-oriented background, I've learned always focus at your customers and stakeholders first, and then think backwards to what does this mean for your multi-team system, and then think about which teams do you need in order to fulfill this overarching goal. What do you have to do? Specify the mission of the multi-team system and formulate a strategy. But you also have to be in constant contact, especially during the transition phase, when you plan what the multi-team system is going to do, because you need to give them some kind of sense and understand what your customers need, your stakeholders, but also integrate the needs and the wishes and the expectations from your stakeholders into that, what you're then afterwards defining as a strategy. Yeah, without the resources, you can't do anything. That's why you also have to make sure that from the start, you have enough resources and support from your external stakeholders.
Martin, can I just ask a question? Or, yeah, okay, sorry, I didn't. Did I get this right, or I found this interesting? You said also that's why you start here on the right-hand side of the slide, that you're saying normally the default behavior is that you start with your team and set it up and so on. So you are also, or the literature is also advising maybe to take first the system perspective view before you kind of then care for your own team, right? because I find this very, I would have started, I thought, why is he not reading on the left? I was totally in this, start with your team. Maybe it's just me, but I totally get if that is meant that certainly you, you can optimize your team to the system, but you cannot optimize the system to your team. So let's start with the system, right?
I'm coming very much from a design perspective. You
Mm-hmm.
first of all have to think about, do you really need a multi-team system? Or is one team enough? If you decide one team, for example, a cross-functional team is
Tim
able
can
to...
help us with that.
Sorry?
Tim can help us with that.
Indeed. But you see, that's also the normal way of thinking when you're in organizations, because people think in teams and their leaders, and then you think about, oh, who can we combine? But sometimes you forget, oh, we are in a certain environment. We have certain expectations from others. That's why I would suggest, yes, start with the overarching goal, because then in a second step, you can define which sub-goals are needed, which sub-processes, sub-tasks are relevant, and which teams are best able to deliver this product or this sub-task. I know sometimes multi-team systems in organization are built in the other way around. You sit there and then you have a team leader and says, okay, we are not able to deliver the service alone. Let's bring another team leader. And then you have these leadership meetings and you completely forget, hey, let's have an overarching look at the system before
Absolutely.
you start emerging from the single team members or the single teams that are there. So indeed, it's sometimes puzzling people like you are puzzled at the moment, but that's why I deliberately always say, start with the context, start with your customer. Don't start with the system that you have already at hand, because it can be necessary that you define new teams for specific tasks that are not there yet. Tim, I think you are quite close to this topic, rearranging organizations based on things they have to do.
Yeah, and I totally like this slide. We, as Reconfig, by the way, for those that don't know it, it's artificial intelligence for organizational optimization. But we pivoted because we actually went from the left to the right, and now Reconfig 2.0 is going from the right to the left. So totally in line with what you're presenting. I like the depth of your analysis as well. But what I did, I spoke with 100 people across the world, and consistently they gave back that organizational network analysis is very helpful, but you need to have that outside-in perspective. And now we're trying to blend the two. So we now have 4 modules in our software that are actually predominantly going from right to left, but still a little bit of left to right. And then it's a science and an art. So the people that master this art can use the software, but the software will never replace intuition or good expertise in a consultant.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Thanks for this addition. Coming back on what leaders have to do during action phases from an external perspective, and this is sometimes forgotten, communicate with your external stakeholders. Something that quite often happens in multi-team systems, but also in teams and organizations, is forgetting the customer while you are working. So try to make it as clear as possible where you are. Are there constraints? Are there new expectations from external stakeholders that might change the course that you've taken? You also should monitor and maintain alignment of your action, as already said, with external contingencies. Things happen. Suddenly Corona is there. And you have to change the way of working because people can't be at the office anymore. And you also should coordinate the sequential actions of the multi-team systems with those of external stakeholders. Always think about their cycles. What is important for them? Which important events do they have where you have to relate to as a multi-team system? Going to the second level, when you established your multi-team system, there's a bunch of teams there. What you should do in the beginning is develop shared norms, standards, and expectations. So in an ideal world, you start with a good kickoff with all the component teams and all the members and the leaders of the component teams, where we define this is the way of working. This is the software we use to support our working. Do we use Teams, Zoom, Where do we store our documents? Is it on a SharePoint? Is it in Microsoft Teams? Are there specific formats we use? Do we have templates? Everything that is needed in order to synchronize the work of the different component teams. What else do you have to do during the transition phase? Specify the goal hierarchy. How are the different goals of the different teams that contribute to the multi-team system goal interconnected? Is there some kind of temporal sequence? Do some of the teams have to start later? Nobody says that a multi-team system is the same in the beginning as in the middle as in the end, because you can have additional teams that are needed only for a specific phase of the multi-team system. And this is something you should initially plan. Otherwise, you have often the big problem that people are sitting around that don't contribute at the moment, being bored, saying, why am I here? They lose their motivation. That's why really deliberately think about what is needed when in order to achieve the overarching goal. And then you should develop an action plan for how teams will collaborate. Ideally, write it down, make it visible, show it to people, find some kind of illustration, visualization for it. Build a nice poster where you say, oh, these are our component teams. They develop specific parts of our product, for example, and how are they connected to each other? Then you have to communicate the mission, the MTS strategy, and the plans across the teams. So as said before, start with the overarching perspective and then go one layer down and think about what does this mean for the individual teams. During the action phase, when tasks are done, you have to monitor the sequential and synchronous coordination in the multi-team system, which is quite challenging, looking at does everybody deliver what they have planned for. In many cases, as I already said, a common drumbeat helps, as you have it, for example, in Scrum of Scrums, where you have your regular sprints, when it is clear that we have review meetings on a regular basis where everybody prepares for these meetings. This helps you also tremendously in tracking multi-team system goal progress and also in identifying and resolving blockades, which always happen if we have a complex product development, a complex goal to achieve. There will always be blockades that have to be mitigated, risks that have to be discussed. And you should also manage the communication about actions and the progress across teams. You can't rely on teams always automatically communicating with each other. So you should establish in your transition phase already some kind of regular communication pattern of monitoring scheme, how to communicate the progress. This also helps you to sustain the motivation of people. If they see the progress somehow, have progress bars for the individual teams where you say we are now at 50% or 70%, whatever it is, that helps you visualizing and getting a feeling of where you are. And last but not least, and this is something that most of us know, the classical team leader function. What do you have to do? Setting team objectives and specifying the tasks. Sometimes on a multi-team system level, you only define the overarching goals of a team and say, okay, now we delegate it to the team to make the fine planning of the specific things that really have to be done because the experts sit in the team. You also should carefully look at the staffing of the team and which roles are needed. The good question always is how many people should you have in a team? Yeah, as many as you need for the respective task and not more, which makes it sometimes complicated to say how many people are these, but this is something you should think about before. Not adding just people, don't throw people at problems, they say in Great Britain, but try to be as specific as possible which roles are needed to fulfill the task of the team. Then you go also level deeper, develop team plans and communicate them to the other teams. So for example, you can do some, as I already said, overarching planning in the on the multi-team system level, go down to the team level, specify, detail it out, and then close the feedback loop to all the other teams. What is now our specific action plan? In which phases do we work? Do we have specific substreams in our team that are working on different tasks? Just to make clear that everybody else understands what your own team is doing. And you should also communicate, last but not least, the norms, standards, and expectations that were defined on the multi-team level. You know how fast teams start to live on their own. They develop their own templates, they ignore what you have tried to implement centrally on them. And in the long run, chaos comes up because everybody who has done program management knows how hard it is to force teams to stick to the rules you once defined. Please use our templates. We have to aggregate information for our stakeholders. If you do the things on your own, we won't be able to do that. And during task accomplishment, you have to monitor the progress of the team. Also here, identify and resolve blockades. Track the use of resources. Do we have enough things that we need in order to really do our tasks? Provide guidance and give feedback to the team members. So then coming to the lowest level, the individual level, not only team feedback, but also to individual members. How do you proceed? How well are you in your goal achievement? And you should also communicate your actions and the progress to other teams. So you see, coming from a functional perspective, this sometimes really helps me. If you start with transformational leadership, authentic leadership, servant leadership, they are extremely abstract. And I really like the functional perspective, thinking about what do leaders have to do, yet the things that teams are not able to do themselves. So you come from the idea, what are the tasks of a leader, not what are behavioral patterns or something like that. And as I already said, how can we foster collaboration? There's nothing more practical than a good theory. In the last minutes of my presentation, I would like to use to show you an example what I did recently with a team or a multi-team system consisting of 5 sub-teams. I did a diagnosis, classical survey-based feedback. And you see here now the items that I used. The scale always ranged from 1, not at all, to 5, very much. You see here the average values. The colors are based not only on mean values, but also on the distribution of the different numbers that we got. And you see the alignment was quite well, and also the entrainment. And you see also how you can measure alignment with simple questions as the goals of our teams are well aligned with the overarching goals of our network of teams. And it's really interesting to go into details when you discuss that. Also, the goals of our teams are well aligned with the goals of other teams in our networks. And you see, always most crucial, the interfaces between the teams in our networks of teams are clearly defined. I won't go into details now for entrainment, but what I want to really show you is how you can measure mission analysis, goal specification, and strategy formulation and planning. And this heavily borrows from work that was done by Marx and colleagues who defined the different processes, and these items are basically stemming from their definitions. So mission analysis is we identify our main tasks, we identify the key challenges that we expect to face, and we determine the resources that we need to be successful. Please keep in mind, these were now the questions that were asked on the multi-team system level, and in parallel, I also ask the same questions for the team level, because both processes are similar on both levels. So you can always differentiate between how are we proceeding and doing in the multi-team system, and in addition, how are we doing our work in our team itself. So you can not only have a big workshop with all the multi-team system members, but also team workshops where we discuss how can we improve our work in the teams. I won't go looking at the time into details of all the questions, but I really can recommend it. It's a nice scale that is also scientifically based and validated. And what I really like, the questions are not as similar as they usually are. They really tap into different aspects of the construct. So I really like this questionnaire because it gives you more information than just asking one overarching question. And you see, what is the regular pattern? People only think in one plan that they initially developed, and they don't think in contingency plans. What happens if the first plan that we developed did not work out? And this is something I really recommend to many teams. Think of alternative paths to your goal. Monitoring systems and resources. not only financial, equipment, but also inventories, equipment and process operation, information flows. Mutual monitoring and backup. You see always, it's also a classical finding when I do this kind of analysis. Balance of workload is something really critical in many, many teams. So many people have the feeling that they contribute more, or rarely less than the others. And they have the feeling that there is some kind of imbalance between the contributions. You immediately see what you can do when you have these results, yet discuss them. Where does this feeling come from? Where can we find interventions in order to balance our efforts and also our workload better? Also regarding smooth integration of the work efforts. Sometimes people work in one direction, the other works in the other direction. Unfortunately, they don't coordinate. That's why, yeah, you just waste time, energy, and also the effort of people, which is quite frustrating for them in the long run. And to give you a feeling, what does conflict management, motivating and confidence building and affect management mean? For example, to deal with conflict in a fair and equitable way, to show respect for each other, and to maintain harmony in the network of teams. Don't forget, harmony and cooperation and collaboration is based on you wanting to collaborate. If you once decided you don't like the other anymore, because, for example, you feel unfairly treated, yeah, you can forget about collaboration in the long run. What also would be helpful, yeah, take pride in your accomplishments. That's by measuring how you are proceeding is really important. If you don't get a feeling, where are we at the moment? It's hard to clap on your own shoulder and say, hey, we managed to fulfill our next step. Yeah, to also stay motivated even when things get difficult, and you could also encourage each other to perform best. This is not only a leadership task, it's also something that you do on a regular basis within teams. Performance norms are in the background. And then you should share a sense of togetherness and cohesion, manage stress well, and keep each other from getting overly emotional or frustrated. I think, Kristin, we also talked in our small group before about this negativity spirals. Yeah, if you realize there is at the moment in our team happening some kind of spiral like that, yeah, then you should say, hey, let's stop it. I don't want to moan anymore. I don't want to blame anybody anymore. Let's get again solution focused and not only problem focused. And this is something that you have to do on a regular basis. Otherwise, yeah, you feel it every day when you come to the organization. And the last tip I want to give you, this was now based on rather systematic survey-based measurement. What I really like to do with teams is presenting them a collaboration matrix. What do? You can do it also based on surveys, but this is really fun to do it in a workshop where you ask every team or a representative of the team, please judge or rate the intensity of collaboration with other teams. And I think, Tim, this should be quite close to what you are doing. The level of interdependence you feel, and it's only 3 levels for each of these questions. So be simple, be easy, don't make it complicated, and please rate the quality of collaboration. And the nice thing is, if everyone does this with the other one, meaning one team with every other team, you get a matrix. And this is now a real example. And this is always so interesting. Basically, what you see, collaboration, you saw it already in the other results too, was quite positive in this multi-team system of 5 teams. But what was really intriguing is Team B evaluates the collaboration with Team A on an ambient level with high interdependence, and they say we collaborate sometimes. And the interesting part is the perception of the other team is completely different. And then you can dig deeper into why is this the case. So it's only perception of reality. Sometimes they say there is no reality, there are only perceptions. Sometimes there are really interesting story behind these differences. Also, for example, in this team, Team A says about Team E, very well collaboration, intermediate level of interdependency, but a lot of collaboration. Yeah, and unfortunately, the other team has the complete opposite discussion. What was done in this team, we had what was really nice, speed dating between the leaders and also members of the component team, where they discussed critical incidents. Where does this come from? How do you build this perception? What can we do in the future in order to avoid different views and also to avoid collapses in our collaboration? So I really like this tool because it does not have to be survey-based. You can do it really in a workshop where each team does this in a small group. You bring it together and then you sit there and do this speed dating thing where you really get into details and discuss how to improve collaboration in the future. I have some recommended readings. The book I already showed, really nice reading, not too deeply scientific, not many statistical coefficients in there, but a lot of really nice reading where you can learn how to think about multi-team systems. And if you have questions, if you want to know more about this topic, always come to me. Don't hesitate to contact me. Now I learned 45 minutes are really short. Any questions, remarks, perspectives from your side?
I really loved it, Martin. I'm working as an agile coach, and Martin was my former teacher at university, so I'm really excited to be here today. And if you have some tips about papers as well, I mean, I think you recommended some books, let me know. Because I mean, I'm working at Deloitte in a consultant company, and we are really heuristically working, and I want some more basis like evidence-based consulting and things like that. So yeah, I will write you.
Write me an email, Janina. I can send you several papers that are really nice. There's a recent meta-analysis on multi-team systems, review on multi-team systems where I can get into details.
Yeah, I'm working in a safe construct, so it's totally my topic. So I have all the problems you were talking about, and this metrics you were showing right now, it was such a gift because I need it right now, because we are having more and more dependencies, and the people feel under pressure because some, like the user stories, depend on each other, and then others get under stress, and so that's wonderful. I really needed that, and it was perfect timing. Thank you so much.
The classical sentence, I can't proceed because I'm waiting for the others, right?
Yeah.
And everybody waits for everybody. That's the most horrible situation you can have. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Martin, I would love to catch up with you because this metrics is the basis of our software. And the way you presented it gave me some new inspiration. But it's really helping to go to the next level. So what we're now also adding is something like topology. So not only person A or role A or team A is depending on team B, so these interdependencies, but also we talk about multi-value streams, or we talk about platforms. So what we now do is we diagnose not only the relationships, but also the kind of teams. What kind of team do you have? Mm-hmm. So with some cases that we've been working on, and I would love to pick your brain on that one, is that you find that it's about the nodes in the graph, what actually is the nature of a unit, and what's the nature of the interdependency. Mm-hmm. And if you design that way, you start designing teams differently, and it's much better than SAFe or LESS or any of those scaled frameworks. It really helps to design organizations that naturally fit the mission.
Mm-hmm. You should always differentiate between input, process, and outcome dependencies, at least in a scientific perspective. You can do that because this automatically also structures your way of working. If you have input dependencies, yeah, this is not so complicated because you only have the same resources only. But if you have outcome dependencies, then it gets really critical because you can't proceed your work if the others don't accomplish their goal already. And looking from this perspective, yeah, let's align on that, Tim.
Let's I'll send an invite. I really like it. We don't have time to go into much detail now, but this is so much aligned with what we're doing also with our 2.0 kind of products. And if you're interested, Janina, one of our founders is a professor who used to work at Deloitte. So he's got a background in Deloitte. So we turning So his name is Nikolai Warren, and he's now a professor in organization design at the Oslo University. But he used to be a consultant at Deloitte.
Yeah, maybe I can connect with him. If you,
I will
drop me
connect
his name. Okay,
yeah,
cool.
I will
awesome. I put my name on the board and the details, so find it there. All right.
Wonderful.
Now I think we have to go back to the main stage. Thanks for participating and see you in the main stage.
See you. Bye bye.
Great work,
Kristen,
Martin.